Hey everyone, I'm Brian Bates, and I trust Google Maps without questioning it.
West on.
I'm Linda DeYoung, and I unironically use the Kahoot music at parties.
And this is the One-to-One podcast, brought to you by the Learning Technology Center. Well, hello and welcome back to another episode of One-to-One. Linda, how's it going?
Brian, it's going well. We're starting to wind down fall here and get into actual winter times in December.
Yeah, by the time this episode comes out, people are going to start be moving towards those holiday plans. We know what it's like in classrooms during the holiday season and leading up to the holiday season, so hang in there.
Yes.
Hopefully you can use today's episode as a nice little break. And with that, actually, we have a great episode today. It's an awesome conversation. So we're just going to jump right in. Is that okay, Linda?
Yeah, that's great. Let's do it.
Okay. So we've been kind of leading off our episodes with the news you can use segment. So in this segment, we look at the most recent headlines that put today's topic into perspective, something that made us pause and say, that's interesting. And we have a conversation today about AI. And so this is an article I came across, and I have to admit, I wasn't as familiar with the subject of this article, but I'll start it off by asking you, Linda, because I feel like sometimes there is a discussion or even a debate on this. Are you an Uber or a Lyft person? And how would you feel if there was a new option?
Well, between Uber and Lyft, if those are my only two choices, I'm an Uber person. But I don't actually think that that's because of any good reason. I think it's just because Uber was kind of before Lyft in a sense. And it was the thing that I started using first. And then I just never migrated or tried anything else. But I know people who are hardcore Lyft people as well. But I would love to hear about new options, as someone who I kind of have a lot of thoughts about transportation. So I'd love to hear what this article's about.
Yeah, I'm definitely an Uber person as well. And I'm for the same reasons. It was just the first one I used. And I'm like, hey, that was kind of cool. I guess I'll keep doing it, and the idea that you can, we've gone from you go to the edge of the street and look for a yellow vehicle to drive by and wave your hand at it to, I'm ready for a ride and you know exactly what's coming.
Right.
Also kind of the bizarreness of just getting in a car with a stranger.
I know.
And having them drive you somewhere. And but when I travel, sometimes those are some of the most enjoyable conversations I've had with an Uber driver. But yeah, I posed the question of what if there was a new option, and something I wasn't incredibly familiar with until I read this article and I started looking more into it is, are you familiar with something called Waymo?
I'm not.
So in this article, it was talking about a new rideshare service that's going to be coming to Detroit, Las Vegas, and San Diego. It's already in a few cities over on the West Coast.
Okay.
Waymo is an autonomous driving service. It is best known for its robo-taxi service. It's also working on autonomous delivery or shipping drivers, replacing an over-the-road truck driver type thing. And there's some other initiatives they have, but the best known for their robo-taxi service. So it's just like Uber or Lyft, but there's one key missing piece to that experience, and that is the driver. So you download the app, request a ride just like you would with Uber, and a driverless car comes to pick you up and takes you to your destination. So I guess my next question for you is, how would you like it? We kind of mentioned you get in a car with a stranger. Well, now you're not getting in a car with a stranger. You're not getting in a car with anyone. How do you feel about the idea of an autonomous rideshare?
Fascinating question. To start off, you must know I'm a public transportation kind of girl. I don't know if our listeners know this, but I used to live in Taiwan, Taipei, and there are trains everywhere there. I took the train every day, and I wish that there was better infrastructure in all of our cities, not even just the big ones, but all of our cities for more public transportation. But I think if it was between getting in an Uber or a Lyft with a actual person or getting in a driverless car, there would be scenarios where I would prefer to be in a driverless car. And I think part of that has to do with like the safety of it,
Hmm.
like because there's no one in the car, you don't have to worry about like who am I getting into a car with right now?
Yeah.
And you don't have to worry about like, is this the right car? They always tell you check the license plate, make sure it actually is your driver.
Yeah.
And it takes kind of the guesswork and the fear out of that. But at the same time, then it's kind of replaced by a fear of like, is the driverless car going to like make the right decisions on the road?
Hmm.
Or is it going to be more efficient than like a person at the steering wheel because you have all that human error that comes into factor when you have a person driving versus like a machine. So I think
Hmm.
those are all things like I would be considering when getting into a driverless car. I don't know.
Hmm.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like I think I mentioned this a little bit ago that I do enjoy talking to an Uber driver. I find
Mhm.
you get a lot of good recommendations for places to eat or what's going on. I would prefer to talk to the Uber driver during my ride than not talk. For the most
Sure.
part, yeah. There are some times where I've gotten flown in late and just get me to my hotel. I just
Yeah.
want to be at the hotel. I get that. Um, but yeah, it's interesting you talk about. I love that you kind of went with like, okay, there's the safety of getting in a car with a stranger, which still sounds kind of odd. I don't like to think about that. Or then the idea of getting into the car with no one, a robot, and something that's relying 100% on technology. Um, and so like I kind of looked into it a little bit more after this. This wasn't necessarily part of the article, but it does dive into this a little bit. Thinking about safety, there are a bunch of different technologies that Waymo uses. And so they use LiDAR. So it says they have
Mhm.
thousands of lasers that are shooting out of the car to detect things. Like not now, I wish it was like the lasers like you're thinking of. It's not
Like
like
the
a laser.
Matrix.
Yeah, exactly. It's not quite like that. It's not, you don't see those types of things. But yeah, it uses LiDAR, it uses radar and all these different cameras to navigate the streets. And then kind of where it comes into what we're talking about today is the AI helps predict movement. So it's going to take and
Mm.
identify objects and predict the movement and predict the
Oh,
speed of movement and things like that. And it also mentions that the AI is trained to drive defensively, avoiding aggressive maneuvers, speeding. And I think there was in a different article I read, like following up with it, it talked about that the 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 Waymo is actually going to be more cautious than probably a human driver would be.
right.
Um, and then even like let's say you get to a situation where there's road construction and there's a street closed and it doesn't the the Waymo can actually call and do a phone a friend. It can actually call a support system and talk to a human that the human will then provide it context with what to do.
Interesting.
I just find all that fascinating. So
Yeah.
and what caught my eye with this was I wasn't really familiar with Waymo, and then I see, wait, it's coming to more cities. And
Mhm.
so as someone I know Linda, you and I don't live very far apart. We're an hour to an hour and a half
Yeah,
outside of Chicago.
right.
When will it be in Chicago? And like I'm kind of
Mhm.
excited now. I sort of want to try it. So when it gets here or when you get to a city, are you going to give it a shot?
I feel like, Brian, just like anytime that we end up going to a conference together, like we just were in San Antonio together, and you were like, we gotta take the scooters. We gotta get on one of those little scooters. We have to
But you
get
liked
in a
it.
Waymo.
You enjoyed the scooter
I
time.
did. I feel
See?
like we have to go in a Waymo if it comes to Chicago, or if we find ourselves in a city where they have it, we should make it our mission to, just like the scooter, we should make it a Waymo mission to find one, order it, and see what it's like because I am fascinated by it. Um, and
Strictly for research for the podcast purposes, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. This is not for our personal enjoyment or benefit at all. This is research,
Yeah,
scientific,
exactly.
evidence-based. But yeah, let's give Waymo a try if we ever have the opportunity because I'm totally down. I want to experience what a driverless car is like.
All right. Well, that's a deal. And if you out there are interested in reading more about the Waymo service and its expansion, we'll have a link in the show notes for you to check that out.
All
Well, should we move on and get started with the rest of our episode?
Yeah, I'm excited because today we're going to be joined by Amanda Bickerstaff, the co founder and CEO of AI for Education. And AI for Education is an organization that's dedicated to helping educators and schools adopt AI in a responsible way. Through their resources, training, and expert guidance, AI for Education has supported over 350,000 educators around the world, establishing themselves as a leading voice in shaping AI policy at both the state and national levels. So, like Brian said earlier, we have a lot to get through and it's a great conversation. So, let's go ahead and get into it.
Amanda is the co-founder and CEO of AI for Education, a former high school biology teacher and ed tech executive with over 20 years of experience in the education sector. She has a deep understanding of the challenges and opportunities that AI can offer. She's a frequent consultant, speaker, and writer on the topic of AI in education, leading workshops and professional learning across both K-12 and higher ed. Amanda is committed to helping schools and teachers maximize their potential through the ethical and equitable adoption of AI. Amanda, welcome to our podcast.
Hi, glad to be here today.
Thanks so much for joining us today. And we always like to start off our guest segment with getting to know them just a little bit better. It's just a little way to get, a little bit more information about you. So we usually do this with a game. And I was wondering if you are down to play.
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Sounds good. So, Amanda, in your role, I'm guessing that you've crossed paths virtually, at least, with most of the big AI models out there.
Yes, definitely.
And today's game is called the hypothetical hallway. And here's kind of how it works. I want you to imagine that you're walking down a hallway and suddenly you run into like a physical embodiment of a large language model like ChatGPT. And you've got to react fast because you're just passing in the hallway. So you have three options. You can either give them a high five, you can start an in-depth conversation, or you can just avert your eyes and keep walking. So I'll name some of the most popular AI models, and you'll tell me out of those three options, what's your reaction? And if you like, you can tell us why you went with that choice. So are you ready to play?
Absolutely.
All right, you're walking and boom, Chat GPT.
I think if it's training, it's definitely a deeper conversation. If it's personal, it's a high five and see you later.
Fair. What about Gemini?
Gemini and I don't get along primarily for training. So every time I try to use Gemini in training, it's been like, no, Amanda, I'm going to like mess up, including in front of Google before. So Gemini and I are not friends when it comes to trading. So I would say see you later.
All right. What about Claude? Sort of a lesser-ish known one.
Well, we've been training on Claude since the very first time I ever went to a school. So June 2023. So in fact, we're one of the reasons why Claude, you can still train on it because of at one point they kind of collapsed the ability for multiple users at the same time accessing the tool. So Claude is the one I use the most personally. And we love to show it as well. And I think we might be a big part of at least some of Claude's their ability to get into K-12 spaces because of the work we've done.
Amazing. What about Perplexity?
So Perplexity, their terms of service are they're trying to be the next Google, and we think a lot about safety. So while I think that generative search has a lot of opportunity, it's definitely a see you later.
And finally, what about Grok?
Not even a see you later. That's like I not interested. That's not fair. I am surprised by how many people use Grok without really recognizing how it's been trained and designed and deployed. And so, from our perspective, Grok is being created for the very specific point of view and is not particularly trying to be ethical or objective. So we just do not support it.
And that is the hypothetical hallway. I'm so enthralled by your perspectives on these because I feel like so many people have different reactions to these models, especially like the way that they're using them in their personal lives. And so thanks so much for your insight on that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, let's get down to the real business of why we're here. We wanted to talk today with you about kind of exploring federal guidance, policies, state initiatives, all those types of things, and how they're shaping how schools are implementing AI, and talking about practical ways that leaders can navigate this change as it continues to rapidly evolve. So, to start with, I think before we go all the way down the policy conversation and dive into that one, let's just kind of back up with you personally. And you started your career in the classroom as a high school biology teacher. How does that experience in the classroom continue to shape the way that you approach the work that you do with AI for education today?
Well, I think that it's a unique moment because, coming from an educator perspective, one that was in the classroom, one that has been around schools for the last 20 years, one that's built technology for schools, has given me a pretty unique perspective about this moment in time. From a very practical sense, I think having been educators, like, believe very strongly that if the things that we create and we support don't immediately make sense to people and like their own model of understanding about education and like teaching and learning, then what we're doing doesn't really have an impact. Because like, you think of how many enormous frameworks and ideas and research that always sits aside or above around like what's actually happening in classrooms. I mean, I just look at the science of reading. Oh, but science of reading, we've been talking about it for decades, but like it was never in a just like, it was like, was it discrete? Was it practical? Even today, I think there's an expectation that like teachers would just be able to do and understand the science of reading without really recognizing that this is like a pretty significant like theory that needs to be taught and understood and like by the teachers first before they can apply it in classrooms meaningfully. So I think that that is a huge part of why we hire so much in terms of education, meaning like our project manager, our director of business development, our marketing manager have all taught. Like we're kind of top to bottom educators, because I think it's just, you have to understand the realities that like your classroom, your teaching is only one component of a young person's education experience. And in fact, sometimes the stuff that happens outside the classroom is bigger than what happens inside the classroom. And if you don't understand that, then how are you building things that are truly fit for purpose? So for us, I think it makes a huge difference. We think about it all the time. I teach more today than I taught when I was a teacher. In a sense, I mean, I just do. Like, it's crazy. Like, I mean, I was a teacher, I was doing my best, but like, I wasn't particularly good, guys. I was like in a very complex environment in New York City. I was 22 years old. I was an alternative route certification teacher, and I got better at teaching by, in the time that I was there. But in the last like 2.5 years, I mean, the amount of people, the amount of time, the amount of content that I've taught is magnitudes more than the time I taught in the classroom. And I think that while it's not exactly the same, because of like, I get to come in and leave and I'm like, I'm with Brian and then I'm like, here's all your stuff. I love to help you, but we're going to go help someone else. It's a bit different. So I will recognize the easy part, but it does, I think, like, it is like this natural extension of what I was doing in the classroom back when I was a baby teacher, all the way through, 20 years later, when we were building this company and we're trying to make these significant impacts in and across the entire education ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that resonates a lot. Like, that answer resonates a lot with me because both Brian and I are also prior teachers. And so, when we're having discussions about really anything, it's always around like, what would I as a teacher like want or need in this moment in time? Like, what if I imagine myself back in the classroom, what would teacher me need? And I think that's so crucial when it comes to these conversations, especially because AI is such a broad, big new world. And there's going to be all kinds of ways that teachers are implementing AI that, based on their comfort level, their education with AI itself, like how they know how to use it. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And just thinking about, as policymakers continue to work towards, whether there's policy in place in a state or not, as they continue to work thinking about what's best for the student and who better to talk to than former or current educators, obviously. I think that's going to be so crucial to make sure that we get it right as we move forward and develop policies and guidance for our districts, is what's best for the student. And I love the fact that you mentioned, what's going on in the students' lives and their worlds around them, to help with that and understanding what they're going through and how that impacts their learning environment.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that for those of you that don't know our work, so AI for Education, we have been committed to AI literacy for 1 million educators. And we just actually changed our mission at the start of the school year to include students in that. And the reason being is that we just do not see that organizations are prioritizing student AI literacy. And whether that means in terms of like even like casual AI literacy, like guideline, like casual, it sounds like guidelines don't say casual, but for a kid, a set of guidelines is not necessarily going to be like teaching them a lot more than about guardrails, which are incredibly important. But like there's not even like that much like happening in districts yet around that in a way that we would think would lead to like real change in terms of student usage or parents for that matter. But like I think the issue that we're seeing around student use is that so much student use is happening outside of the school day, and it's happening outside of schoolwork. Meaning like it's not just everyone is doing their homework with Photomath or ChatGPT or whatever it may be, but they're using it for companionship. They're using it for mental health and well-being. They're using it for romantic relationships and friendship, and they're using it to be creative, and they're using it to build. They're using it to do all of these things. And yet we're not really thinking about these young people's developmental stage and age in a way that like can keep them safe. I mean, not just safe, but like, I mean, their brains, like, it sounds like Frankenstein, but like, you know, like Dr. Frankenstein, the brains, but like, you know, the elasticity and the need for developmental awareness, the need for critical thinking, the need to like continue to establish the importance of different types of work and hard work of learning can't be something it just like that's not going to happen by osmosis. When the internet was launched, when social media and devices, just because those things existed and people used them, especially young people, it did not equate to the idea that that young people knew how to use these tools in meaningful, responsible, supportive ways. And we've seen it happen continuously. And I think that what's happening right now, it's almost like it's the kind of rhetoric of it's got to be about cheating, or it's moving too fast, or you know, like we have to start with teachers and leaders first, instead of like, wait a second, this needs to be something we do together. Everyone can learn together. And I promise you that AI literacy does not take 10 years. It takes 3 hours. We see it happen all the time in the work that we do. But I think that is like the real risk of today is not kids are going to cheat on papers, but like that we're not going to prepare them for a world in which they're going to make good decisions about when and when not to use AI that actually further them as learners, lifelong learners, as happy adults, as well-adjusted young people. And I think that is something that we just see as a huge concern for any type of leader that might be watching this. I just think it's so important.
Yeah. And I think, you know, part of our discussion today is around policy and, you know, talking about what actually is meaningful policy, because you're right. The focus has been so much on AI for plagiarism. Like, how do we put guardrails in place in educational settings? And while that is like a real concern, not to diminish that at all, we also want to talk about, you know, what parts of AI policy are crucial, in your opinion, for developing robust systems of support for teachers, for students, for schools. So in your current role, you kind of have like a national vantage point of what's going on across the board. And I'd love to hear about what is one kind of promising trend or policy that you're starting to see across the states or across different districts when it comes to that meaningful use of AI in education.
Well, I think that probably the strongest is going to be a little bit more amorphous than you probably want me to say, but
That's okay.
I feel like Linda, it's our first time meeting, but Brian knows me. I'm a little bit of a real talk person. I don't think it helps that much to not kind of put things down. But I think the fact that, you know, more than 30 states have AI guidelines for K-12 is a really good sign. They are somewhat similar in the sense of it talks a lot about the need for human judgment, data privacy and security, student academic integrity guidelines. I think that the problem is that there are not very many truly practical resources being created. And so you have lots of like guidance and frameworks, but like when it comes down to it, like even for example, Ohio is doing some really interesting things, and Tennessee as well, about starting to mandate AI policies. But like part of that, like in Ohio, is like, here's an AI policy to start with, and that still hasn't been developed, right? So that even like there's like this kind of like, yes, you should, but like there's not really a consensus about what it should look like. I think that what we also want to kind of put a finer point on is that policies are probably the least of it. Like all boards have policies around academic integrity, acceptable use, and data and privacy. And those could be updated with a sentence and a parenthetical.
Yeah.
They can just say like, including emerging technology like generative AI systems, and all of those different things. And then I would say like maybe a new, which maybe should just happen already, a digital well-being policy at the board policy level, where you're talking about things like, you already probably are talking about acceptable use with cyberbullying, but things like companionship, cyberbullying, digital well-being in general, about like what we're going to be doing around that. I think that that is like actually not that hard to do and to get approval. But I think what's harder is that the thing that's going to make change is not those policies, but a set of guardrails and guidelines that set out number one, what is the vision of generative AI in your district or school or association or college? Like, is like, we suggest very strongly that you should not have a generative AI guideline. You should have, how is generative AI going to further and support the work we're already doing? And then what do we need to be aware of to keep our young people and our adults safe and doing the right types of work? And so that is a much more significant process. It is one in which that requires coalition. It requires change management, and it requires like thinking, like, finding the time to like sit together and say, what actually is our vision? And what's really interesting is that we have co-written the guidelines with a lot of large organizations. We're in the process right now with Charleston Public Schools. It was really interesting. So like usually if it's a smaller district, you can kind of like do this one day session and you get to a good place. And we've got our boilerplate that we update. It's been approved by a bunch of districts. But it was interesting with a larger district, just getting everyone in the room and having them sit there for the day and work through these meaningful questions was so rich. And I could tell you this because we had like just over probably about 25 people, and we gave them we didn't get to everything. And we gave them like a pretty robust, like fill in the blank kind of like, what do you want about this? And like almost all of them completed it, and not completed it in sentences, but in paragraphs. They were so engaged in the process, from parents to students to researchers to leaders to instructional tech coaches to teachers, because they got the space. And it didn't mean that everyone agreed in that space, but coming together to be heard, to have to start building consensus and places of productive dissent is so meaningful. And I think that that is the thing that we talk about, what I see happening versus what we'd like to happen, which is not quite your question, but I'm doing it anyway.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Take it over the podcast, guys.
That's fine.
Is that, what we're missing is that time. And one of the things I really appreciate about it was like, when we push for coalition and diverse stakeholders every single time, even though it was a pain in the butt and maybe people are a little bit afraid about bringing big voices into a room, the biggest thanks we ever get is thank you for asking us and pushing us to like include other voices.
Yeah.
Because it opens up the room, it opens up the discussion, and it creates a space where you realize people are actually, even with disparate like kind of wants and needs, are willing to really communicate meaningfully about this because it matters to them.
I appreciate when you say that the guardrails and guidelines are so important, because I was lucky enough, I got to hear a panel of high school students last week that talk about, and that was one of the things that several of the students said, just tell me how to use it. Tell me what I'm supposed to do, because I go to one classroom and I'm encouraged to do anything I can on it. The next classroom, we can't use it at all. And so, I mean, even students are looking for guidance of just like, hey, help us. We want to use this. Like, how can we do this? And I think that, that kind of goes back to how we started this, all about what's best for the student, providing them the guidance and the guardrails to use this new technology in a safe, meaningful way, and making sure that teachers understand how they can create a learning environment where students are able to do so.
Yeah, and our AI literacy framework is called the C framework, and it's safe, ethical, and effective. And I would say that effective comes in more in like when students are developmentally at an age in which they can use these tools, both in terms of having foundational knowledge, critical thinking ability, and also the awareness that these tools are not thinking, but they are computing and predictive. That if you think about that, that's what we want in every classroom. Are you using it? Like, if you can use it, are you using it safely? Are you over relying on it? Are you giving your data like it's like free candy? Are you using it ethically, where you're being transparent, where you are thinking about, am I going to keep hitting that button, even though that button means energy consumption? Is it going to be something that I'm uploading, something with IP or copyright that's not mine? Even a teacher's work, should I ask permission from a teacher the same way a teacher should ask me permission about my work getting feedback from an AI system? And then am I using it in a way that actually is going to further my thinking, augment and extend versus replace? And I think that if you think about that, that's actually not so crazy. But if you do that every single time that you're talking about it, it starts to kind of come in where you're like, okay, you want to use, you asked me about AI, but let's look at the learning objectives. Where would it be appropriate here? Okay, well, I guess at this stage, probably nowhere, because AI doesn't have your opinions, doesn't have your voice, whatever it may be. But another day, like, oh, absolutely. You know what? Your time management, like executive functioning stuff, is not what I'm looking for. Use generative AI to help you keep on track on that. Or like, I'm much more interested in your ability to identify good research than to even find the quotes, or the other way around. Like those types of conversations that students can articulate and teachers can articulate in those safe, ethical, and effective ways can be lifted and shifted throughout. And I think that that's why like AI literacy for adults and young people need to be more similar than not. Like usually, like you would say, like pedagogy versus like learning. But like I would say AI literacy is for everyone. The same way that students should use AI, teachers should use AI. No teacher should be using it to offload their thinking, to make decisions for them in unethical ways. But that kind of brings us together in this way that like I think is a super unique moment in time, because we can have the same song sheet, so to speak, for everyone, parents included. And how rare is that happen in education, where you can say, this is what it means. Like, these are the decisions, this is what we do. And one of my favorite things recently is that we work with Winnetka Public Schools up in Illinois, outside Chicago, and they have done some great work, but they did the C framework, but they have a C framework document for their teachers. It talks about originality, collaboration, not using AI for grading, not using AI detectors, like being aware of student privacy. And so just the same way that they have something about students not using it without permission to do their work, all of those things, they have that same version for teachers. And they have articulated the safe, ethical, and effective approach for multiple audiences using that same framework, which I think is like, okay, then the kids can say, but what does that mean for you? And you say, well, the same thing it means for you, but this is my profession versus your learning journey. So they're going to be different, but they're going to have so many similarities in terms of the approach.
So I like what you're talking about, how it's a unique time to kind of bring everybody to the table and have a common understanding. But when you try to do that when we try to develop this literacy, maybe there are some challenges and some things that are maybe barriers. So like when you look at all these different states and the work that they're doing and all the different districts, and as they're trying to establish some sort of guidance or policy or how they're going to use it, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing across the states, across the districts, no matter how big they are, whether it's a big school, a tiny little school, or anything like that? What are the challenges that you're seeing for schools?
I mean, the first is it's just schools are complicated, man. I mean, gosh, like we're like our little cities, and these cities are not always the most functional, right? Like you've got so much complexity right now with funding, with attendance, with students of multiple needs and backgrounds, of teacher retention, of all of those. And so AI is like feels like another thing to the vast majority of leaders and potentially also educators. And so and if it's another thing, what do we know happens to other things? They only get pushed through if they have champions.
Yeah.
Yep. Champions that have power, Power in the sense of soft and hard power, money, time. I told you have to do that. Like,
Yeah.
and prescriptive power. And so that's what we're seeing right now, is that champions are still those that are pushing things through. The other things that are hard, and it's hard for us. I mean, we've been doing this for almost 2.5 years. And like, there's not a generative AI model that I'm like, or a generative AI tech tool that I'm like, everyone should be using. There's not one that's like safe, fit for purpose, shows evidence of learning in meaningful ways. It doesn't mean that they don't have value, but the value comes from the individual or small team that has AI literacy, not the other way around. And I just want to give an example. We are a company where we are trying our best to hire people with AI literacy, but we have come up for things where my team has over relied on generative AI in ways in which we had to completely be like, guys, like, no, like, and it felt and looked good, but wasn't good. Like the thing about generative AI, even with like AI literacy, is sometimes you create this house of cards where like the format and the structure looks so good, but if you get to the meat of it, there's no substance. And that's what we call AI slop. AI slop fits the form, but it doesn't actually have the intention, the meaningfulness, that whatever. So I think that even like our organization, trying to do this so much, is still seeing the same thing. And so I think that like that is really tricky, because people are like, Amanda, AI for education, what are your top 5 tools? And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, even our little thing, I'm like, I really didn't like that many of them very much at all. Like
in the hallway.
Yeah.
Right.
Most of them. And I run a company called AI for Education. But I do think that that's a secondary problem. The third problem is it is so noisy. It is the biggest, noisiest things that are holding people out is A, AI is for cheating, and B, it's moving too fast. We can't get started because whatever we do won't matter in a month. And what I would say is that both of those things are not enough. Like they are not like, AI is moving fast, but our trainings look 20% different than they did last year. Not 100% different. Generative AI has more capabilities. It isn't different. Like even with agents, and agents like are still not even very good. So it's like not even like there's all this noise. And then on the other end of AI is only for cheating is that like, if you're only talking about cheating, what you're doing is creating this incredibly negative rhetoric that is pushing AI use into forbidden areas or avoided areas. And then what we have is no one is talking. And instead there are some of us screaming, like for the good and the bad. Like they're knocking, Brian, they're at your door being like, I hate this, it's the best. I hate this, it's the best. And then there's like 95% of the rest of the people being like, I don't know. Like hands up, seems hard, not sure yet, trying it out, see some value. And so what we've done is like both of those spaces, the paralysis of it's moving too quickly is holding some of us back. And then the other piece of like, it is so negatively entrenched in AI equals cheating that it is causing like these like incredible like mental blocks. And I just want to talk about 2 anecdotes. One is I was down in Hillsborough, which has been great. So, 7th largest district, we got to do some great PD. Shout out to Chris down there and everybody there. We had such a good time. But we got to do like a full day where we did like our keynote and flagship. And then we did a couple of sessions, and one of them was or a couple of them are redefining assessment, which by far is our biggest. If you want to have some like good chaotic discussion, come to one of those sessions. It's really, really meaningful, but it does trigger some big feelings. And there were two teachers that came in who were very adamantly opposed to AI in any type of academic work. But they came to my session because of all I truly do believe by having the keynote and everything, it opened them up enough to walk in the room. But they were like not having it, right? In the sense of they just didn't feel like it. And we went through and I kept pushing on like, okay, let's understand. Okay, let's understand. And at the very end of the session, one of the women says, Amanda, and I'm like, oh no, I'm going to get yelled at. And she said, I just had an epiphany. My issue is not the AI. My issue is how my students are using AI. They're using it in the worst possible way. They are taking my prompt or my essay directions. They are putting it into ChatGPT. They're getting an answer. They are cutting and pasting it without reading and submitting it to me as if they don't think I know. But it took 45 minutes after a full day of learning to get to that where we got past what the issue was. So there is something to be said about like how these things can be really, really tricky. And then my other anecdote is I was in Ohio at Beaumont, very different experience, private school in Ohio, you know, really we're doing the same redefining assessment. People are having, I mean, we had like an hour of just questions people are thinking. And one of the teachers who had been so with me the whole day said, Amanda, I understand everything that you're saying. I'm in it. I understand it's coming. I understand we need to do this, but I don't know if I can have one. I don't know if I have one more big change in me.
Mm.
I don't know if I can do this again. I've had COVID. We've had changes in standards. We've had different student populations. I don't know if I can do it again. And it's that kind of big, swirly, noisy, it's moving so quickly.
Mhm.
And so I think that that is the spaces that we don't talk about enough of what's holding us back from change. And they're not the same at all, because the first one about the noisiness and how fast it's going, often is the people that want to do it. And then the assessment one are the ones that hear it and like have no interest, right? And I think that having such big blocks that are of different populations that could be champions is a pretty significant barrier to overcome.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that frustrates me about the as you said, the noise that surrounds the idea of like plagiarism and using it to cheat.
Mhm.
It's like, I think if you want to have concerns about student data privacy, cool. Let's have the conversation about how the data is being handled. Ethical use, bias
Mhm.
that's in AI. Sure, let's talk about those concerns. But like when it comes to the idea of like, well, they're just going to use it to cheat. I think the frustrating thing about that is like, okay, yeah, and that's what happened when schools went 1-to-1. Is that was the question that came up also. And I'm not saying that this is every single teacher that has the concern of plagiarism, but it that goes back to the pedagogical aspect of what are you doing with the AI. And if it's the time old statement of, if you can Google the answer, then is that an assignment or something that you should be doing with your students? If it's as simple as just Googling the answer. So now if it's something as simple as, can you just copy and paste from AI? Do you need to really rethink about what that assignment looks like? And I think that's, to me, it's just more of a matter of, I don't know. I feel like it's too easy to say that it's only for plagiarism, because there's so many ways that you can use it in a meaningful way that take the plagiarism part out of the question.
Right. And it's not even plagiarism. It's not human. Like
True. Yeah.
even I'm saying like even that like is something that we have to start shifting our thinking for. These are tools that can do what was human. And those
Mhm.
skills, like to your point, Brian, like one of the things that we think about a ton is, so we're thinking a lot about instruction. And we looked at these AI assessment scales and felt like they were just not like lovely on FERS, love the work that's being done, Mike Perkins, everybody, but it just felt like the assessment was not enough. Like we had to look at learning. And one of the big questions that we're coming about is like, what will it mean in a world going forward where you as an individual will choose not to use AI to do something that it can do
Hmm.
very well?
Mhm.
Where you will say, the same way that I could go buy a desk, I could also make a desk. I can make a desk from scratch. I can go and get lumber and stuff that's pre-cut. I could like think of all the DIY to like go buy. And like where AI is going to be that that desk that's there, and maybe it's an IKEA desk for if you use the free version, and it's like a fancy, I don't know enough about, this is the first time I use this metaphor. I am not bougie enough to like any nice like any nice desk maker, so sorry anybody that cares about like furniture, but
Craftsmanship.
like but there's those things, right? But like what's going to happen when like there's like an essay I need to learn to write to be able to evaluate an essay, then there's an essay that like I could offload in any way shape or form, but I don't want to because I want it to be mine,
Mhm.
or I know it's important, or I recognize that's not my voice. Like how crazy is that going to be when we're going to have to make choices for the things that have been human for our like the dawn of
Mhm.
writing, right?
Mm.
Are now going to be things that are choices. Like it's my choice to keep writing. It's my choice to keep coding. It's my choice to keep drawing. And I think that that is a very fascinating and big question that it's not for the faint of heart. And we don't start there. But I do think, though, that is something that has to be discussed in the next couple of years, because it is where we are going. It is that these tools are only going to get better at the things that have been human skill set, right? And like, how do we start to think about what teaching and learning becomes, where choice, and it has to be a part of this in a way that has never been before.
Yeah, I would love to also come back to something that you said prior, which is about how fast AI is moving. This is something that like I've been kind of I put a note in the back of my brain like, oh, I want to come back to that, and you said like AI is moving incredibly fast, but there are things that have also stayed the same. Like, when you've been training schools, you're like, we're still having to have similar conversations. And I'd love to know, like, what is your vision? What do you see happening when districts want to create like a long-term strategy for using AI, but they do have that concern about this is moving so quickly. We don't even know how to like start building this. We don't know if what we put down in writing today is going to matter in 6 months. What happens when we have agents? What happens when we have, like supercomputers where it's like general intelligence, what do we do then? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on like how do you go about building a long-term strategy that's going to have staying power?
Well, I think the first thing is you can't get tied to a tool.
Mhm.
Even though tool selection
Absolutely.
and tool vetting is very important, you can't say we're going to use X for Y, because that's where the things are really shifting. That's where you're
Mhm.
going to see the most movement. I would say that things that are not changing is the importance of human judgment and critical thinking and evaluation. No out. We joke now. I can't believe it. I'm such a funny person to do this work, because I'm like making like leaders and superintendents and teachers pinky swear me that they will never accept the first output of an AI system without significant review. But I never
Mhm.
want to see something cut and pasted from one prompt. As adults, like there is that critical evaluation component, human judgment. You can say that no final decision making on grading or hiring or decisions about like actual services should be made with AI only.
Mhm.
That it should be stable when there's super intelligence. I believe that very, very strongly. Like I like we have to keep the human in the loop. Things about the foundational AI literacy that must be built around safe, ethical, and effective use, 1,000%. Like maybe how to use it effectively has changed, but you know what? People now talk about context engineering. It is not that different than prompt engineering. Genuinely, it's
Right.
essentially something. And like if your prompt had good context before, then you're context engineering. So like even like the framing and the names, like we don't have to be technologists, y'all. Like in fact, it's funny because like our prompt library, I built it in April of 2023. People in May were like, Amanda, prompting is going to go away. And guess what? Prompting has not gone away.
We're still here.
Here, context engineering is almost 80% the same as prompt engineering. Do you have to like tell it your grandma needs it for her homework or what? I don't know about all the silly ones. Like you have no hands. I don't know. Like all of those, no. But like the idea of like prompt engineering / context engineering has not changed. So I think that the practices haven't changed. But things like transparency, things like human judgment, things like critical evaluation, those are three pillars plus safety of like, do not, for, okay, I'm going to tell you another anecdote. I was with a school system and I asked who in here uses ChatGPT? I'd say like 60%, 70% raise their hand. And then I said, who in here has turned off training data? And a
Ooh.
room of adults, like 4 out of 400.
How many people raised their hand and said, "What does that mean?"
Yeah, they were
No,
like,
they were
"Excuse
like,
me."
no. Better than that, Brian. They said, Amanda, how do I turn it off?
Yeah.
No, it was
Ah,
as soon as I said it, they were like, oh my God, show me. Like
yep.
it was, but it's like it's hidden. Claude now doesn't even it automatically opts you in. If you're using Gemini, you cannot turn off training data if you're
Yeah.
using the consumer version. Like, so the idea though that like something so basic, and it wasn't like, oh, like no one felt bad. I mean, a little bit. There was a couple people being like, crap. But like it did happen where someone was like, did something recently where she like uploaded some stuff and she went like, Amanda, I think I did something bad. And I'm like, you did, but let's talk about it. Let's fix it. Let's go in here and show you how to do that.
Mhm.
But that's why we have to learn, right? This is why
Mhm.
like learning about, learning with. But I do think like those things like safety, like, transparency, human judgment and critical thinking and evaluation. Why couldn't you build an entire thing around those four things? And if let's say it's quantum or it is super intelligence or it is agents, that agent might be great at pulling together my initial research for something, but it's not going to write my lesson plan without me reviewing it and directing it. How different is that than ChatGPT not just writing a lesson plan and me accepting it? Like
Mhm.
that idea of like pillars that you can come back to, I think are incredibly shelf stable.
Yeah, that's like refreshing to hear in some ways too, because I think even as a personal consumer, I do look at the how quickly AI develops and how it feels like things are just on this like it's like you're at the airport and you're on those like walking sidewalks that are just like you're like zooming. And that's how I feel is I'm zooming. And it is refreshing sometimes to remind yourself like recenter on the fact that no matter how the technology changes over time, there are just going to be like building blocks, foundational human centered skills that are going to be needed at the forefront of our decisions, our conversations, and how we choose to move forward and how we're choosing to use the tool moving forward.
Yeah, that's why we talk a lot about mindsets. We talk a lot about knowledge, skills, and mindsets. So, like the mindsets of prompting are have a conversation, give feedback, don't accept the first response, like make it fit for purpose, and don't reinforce existing practice. Do something that augments, extends. Like those types of things, like are what we believe so strongly are the ways in which we can start to like approach every type of generative AI, right? We can like we know that and we learn about it. And it's interesting because I think that unfortunately the model makers and the Gen AI ed tech tools do not want to build friction into the process. And so they make it seem as easy as possible and they take out the human expertise that is
Mhm.
required to use these tools, right? And so I've been talking in the last couple of weeks about the idea that generative AI should not replace anything. It should
Mhm.
only be an addition to or an extension of.
Mhm.
And I mean that really seriously. Like it should not replace even an email. Because
Yeah.
like it's kind of interesting. We have someone in our team that like is very big on agents automation. And like genuinely we learned a lesson. He learned a lesson. We learned a lesson that the things that look good are not good.
Mhm.
And and looking good is not enough. And I think that it was like a really like I've learned more in the last 6 weeks about how much human judgment must still be part of this, even because as the tools get better and look better, but it still are probabilistic machines that are sycophantic and tell you yes more than they tell you anything else. That if you don't know how important your judgment is and how to choose when to use it, then you are going to be led astray. Whether you are a lawyer, a doctor, working in the press, a teacher, a student, a leader, does not matter. And I think that that's where, again, I don't know, man. I'm gonna have to get. This is my little like wall of like all the stuff I have from the people I go to. I'm just seeing something that says like AI literacy, please, with like exclamation points. And, like that's all I talk about. But do you think that again, until you have AI literacy, the conversations that even we're having are not possible because you don't genuinely know what the upper and bottom limits are because you're not using them in ways where you can see both.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Well, I want to wrap up with look into the future. So there's a lot on the rise. We've been talking about how quickly it changes and just the possibilities that are coming. What's one big goal that you have for the future of AI in education? What's something that you're working towards, or you see out there that might seem far off, but it's a huge goal that you'd love to see be a part of AI in education?
Well, I think the first one is that I'd love to see better fit for purpose like models and tools that are deeply evidence based and have proof that there have been learning outcomes that have shifted or teacher outcomes that have
Mhm.
shifted. I whether that is personalization tools, lesson planning tools, tutors, whatever it may be, that is a big hope that we see in the next couple of years. we're doing a futures piece, and it's going to be launched in January, where we looked at like, kind of one district's fictional journey through where we've been and where we're going, with kind of this branched piece about like decisions that are made. So I think that one of the things that is the biggest kind of push is that the education system, and I mean not just schools, but I mean high stakes testing, I mean colleges, teacher preparation programs, ed tech, the whole shebang, regulation, et cetera, funding allows school transformation and learning transformation to happen.
Mm-hmm.
That the calculated risk tolerance has to change.
Yeah.
The funding of innovative practices, of evidence-based approaches, the idea that we really shift what we think that school is, especially for young, like K-5, man, more important than it's ever going to be, because you have captive audiences and building foundational skills, meaning like, a fifth grader is going to look at you a lot better than a 12th grader in terms of their belief in you.
Just a
little bit. A little more trust with the first grader. But the idea of like looking at like how we start to like rethink that, like, but it has to be a coalition. Like it has to be like all parts of the system. If we're going to just say that like high stakes testing is not going to change, for example, or funding structures or regulations or the Carnegie unit and the way in which kids go to school or higher education, like then what's going to happen is we're not going to be able to move what has been a broken system for decades for most of our students, right? If we haven't moved them in, like we haven't moved as like an actual ecosystem, then what's going to happen is the innovative practice will be squashed. The opportunities will be lost, or it'll get to a place where instead of it's an opportunity to be proactive, it'll be so deeply reactive that we won't really, as an education ecosystem, have control over what the next step is. It'll be more in terms of tech companies, algorithms, governments, et cetera.
Well, we open up our episode with a game, and we like to close our episodes with a little bit of a challenge. So we like to kind of give a hypothetical situation to our guests, give the guest as well as our listeners a little time to think about it, and then see what their thoughts are on it. So are you interested in a little bit of a challenge right now?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. So here's the challenge. Imagine a medium-sized district that's excited about AI, but doesn't know where to start. Teachers are experimenting on their own. Some of them are using ChatGPT to write rubrics. Others are trying Magic School for lesson planning, but there's no shared understanding or guidance in place. Administrators want to create a district-wide plan, but the technology changes so fast that every draft feels outdated before it's finished. Teachers are asking for clarity, and leadership worries about both ethical use and the public perception. So what's a practical way for this district to move forward to set clear direction without slowing innovation or locking themselves into outdated policies? And we'll give you and our listeners a little bit of time to think about this. All right, we are back. So, Amanda, what are your thoughts on that scenario?
Okay, so this is what we tell everybody. The first thing you need to do is gather evidence. We talk about some teachers using this, students are using that. We need to move off anecdote. We need to move to evidence. And so if you want to try this out, AI for Education, our website and our downloadable resources, we have the 5 questions to ask teachers and students. It is so easy. You click a button and you have your own Google form that you can either adapt or add another one. I know I'm a researcher. I love some data. I think that's the most important thing. What is actually happening? Because if you know what's actually happening, it's going to be so much quicker to get to consensus that something needs to happen. Mm-hmm. This idea that like X and Y and students and things and like, sure, great. But what is the actual trends? Do you have teachers using AI detectors? Or do you have students using AI companions? Are young people worried about cheating or other things? Like what is going on? The second thing is you need to create, this district needs to create an AI collaborative task force or PLC. We find that to be an incredibly important step that has been very successful. I will say measured, meaning it's not like people twice a month, but what we would suggest is a core team that you are giving the time, space, and actual resources to develop their own AI literacy and thinking and building capacity, as well as building coalition. And so that should include, but it's interesting about AI committee. You can have like an AI committee in the school, and then you can have like your bigger committee for like guideline development and vision setting, like, but they can flex, right? I think sometimes we can just think it has to be all or nothing, but what we can do is we can flex that up and down. You should be thinking about including teachers and leaders, students, parents, a board member, digital learning specialist or media specialist, an English teacher that is open to listening and, is going to be a great person to come back. You should not include only those voices that you already know are the loudest, whether they are the loudest positive, loudest negative. You already know what they are thinking.
Mhm.
Use them as, next steps, but it should be a much more diverse group. The third thing is it's incredibly important for that group, and then also across the district or wherever you are, to build AI literacy. Do that through trusted, okay, this is not a stand for my company, but you have to trust the quality of the training, and just tapping your tech coach who is learning generative AI on their own is not going to be enough at this moment in time. You need to either be identifying free resources or paired resources or working with experts that do this every day, and then build the capacity of those tech coaches or instructional coaches through their like time, effort, and those spaces. This is why our train the trainer is so important to the work that we do, because it embeds that practice. Again, not a stand for our company, but like just something that we've seen. I've literally talked to 50 people over the last 3 months. I've said the quality of of what's out there is vastly different. And we've listened to some of those things where we've been a part of them and been like, oh man, usually what happens is someone has a lot of education experience and not a lot of generative AI experience, or a lot of generative AI experience and not a lot of education experience. And so what you get is an unclear, kind of thoughtful, it's thoughtful, but it's not going to give you the real needs that you have. A fourth thing is a set of guidelines and guardrails. Of course, update your policies, but do that in the simplest possible way. Get that through for protection and compliance. But get together and start thinking about your vision and building those guardrails. They do not need to be 25 pages. They can be 2 pages. It can be your vision, what it is, acceptable and unacceptable uses, ways in which tools will be vetted, and how we protect student privacy, thinking, and also digital well-being. And then the last thing is start to build those opportunities to embed like that work and that knowledge, where you're coming constantly back to this. You're talking about it, and it's not an AI training and not an AI class, but it's here's this cool thing we're doing, and here's the thing that I did, and we're starting collecting our own prompts, or start collecting our own resources, or having students present, and what does that look like? What is the plan to start lifting up the things that are working and start to identify those? You can do all of that in a year. I believe it. You might need a partner, but it is possible. A year and a half, so you have a year and a half left, everybody, depending on when this is published. But the idea is the 2026 school year. So where are the places, 2027 school year, excuse me, where are the places you can do this? And I say that having seen it happen. Does that mean that you're doing, it sounds like a lot, but think about it. All of these things can be small and contained and supported. They don't have to be enormous. They can be any movement across those 5 areas, especially the first 4, are going to put you in such a good experience of change management, and you're just going to start building that those good things and those movements that you need to be able to do the bigger work. So just this school district, don't be afraid to get started, but also take it off as discrete actions, and you'll be there, I promise.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much for sitting down to talk with us today. AI is a big, wide world that is changing and is fraught with lots of concerns, but also a lot of opportunities. And just like you were talking about in the podcast, having conversations around it is crucial. So thank you for having the conversation with us. If people want to find you, they can visit AI for Education's website, which is aiforeducation.io. But is there anywhere else that people can find you if they want to connect?
I am very on LinkedIn, even though I don't like it, but it is important to do outreach. So there, and then also like we're going to be speaking a bunch, and so I'll be doing a lot of speaking around the country this and next year. So like come hang out. We have our Women in AI Education community. That's a Slack community that does a monthly networking event. We're over 2,000 women worldwide. In fact, the first piece of research was actually published from a collaboration across 13 countries in higher education from that group. So that's a cool place. You can find that on our website and it's free. But yeah, that would be where I suggest.
Absolutely. And Amanda's actually going to be joining the LTC as well for one of our keynotes for our virtual AI conference called Hi AI. And we'll explain a little bit more about that in the final segment of this podcast. So just keep an ear open if you want to learn more about how to see Amanda and how to register for Hi AI.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for being a part of our podcast and being here with you and giving up your time today to talk to us.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, you both. I appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to speaking to your staff.
Thank you so much. And we will see you in the future. Thanks again for sitting down to us 1-1.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode on artificial intelligence. Whether you're a beginner or experienced user of AI, we'd love to have you join us at our virtual conference Hi AI on January 15th and 16th of 2026. It's the perfect way to keep learning about how education and AI are intertwining. Visit ltc.site/hiAI to learn more.
Can't make this conference? Well, you're in luck. We have on-demand self-paced courses on AI that are rave reviewed by our users. Learn about Google Gemini, plagiarism in AI, AI 101, and more. We even have a Notebook LM course coming out in the spring, so stay tuned for that. You can visit courses.ltcillinois.org to register.
And as always, consider following and subscribing to the 1-to-1 podcast on your preferred streaming platform.
Well, Brian, it's great talking to you as always, and I'll see you next month where we'll be sitting down 1-to-1.